Hi, and welcome back. I'm Sheldon McLeod, and this is Thinking Out Loud, presented to you here on the SaltWire Network. And it was a big day today. There was a lot going on. In fact, after months, many thousands of interviews, documents, the Mass Casualty Commission released its final report to the governors and council of Nova Scotia and of Canada. It is a lengthy series of volumes. It's close to 3,000 pages in its total. And Commissioner Leanne Fitch was there to present today. And Commissioner Fitch, thank you for joining me. I appreciate this.
Thank you for having me.
32 years in policing. This has been I would assume, a long process. How does it feel now, finally being able to deliver this report?
Oh, it's a very good feeling to have the report out there in the public, in the hands of government and institutions and community members. We're really looking forward to and counting on others taking this important work forward and implementing our many recommendations.
And I've seen analysis and comment, people describing it as scathing, critical. The commission itself called it a hard truth, or presenting hard truths. How would you describe this report and the work that went into it?
I would say that the work that went into this report was very, very thorough. We had an incredible team of people on the commission working on the report, and of course, we had a very collaborative process with over 61 participant groups, family members, all contributing to the contents of the report that ultimately led to our recommendations. It's a very, very comprehensive report, and we did not shy away from any of the hard truths, and we did so, I think, with great deal of care and attention to detail, and again with the input of many people.
Many of the senior RCMP members who were in command around the time of the incident have either been promoted or have retired, and I'm curious what you think accountability should look like.
Well, our process, as you know, is about seeking out the facts, the causes, the context, the circumstances, the what happened. A public inquiry is all about seeking out answers, making recommendations to improve things going forward. And of course, in that process, there are, as you mentioned, hard truths that we had to surface. And with doing so, we expect that there will be accountability. We were very transparent in our process. We made our recommendations based on good evidence. And I think in terms of accountabilities for individuals, that's not necessarily in the realm of the commission, but most certainly institutional and systemic accountabilities. And we've built those into our recommendations and into our implementation chapter of our report.
And I want to talk about those in a second, but you were in police leadership for many years. What do you feel were the most egregious issues or circumstances from your position or opinion?
Yeah, there were so many shortcomings, honestly, that we had identified. As you know, there were, I think, 74 of our 130 recommendations were focused directly at policing or at the RCMP with respect to the critical incident response. But these are also a number of areas that can be addressed, and responses to future critical incidents can be improved upon. So to pick one out of the 74 is a challenging question. I think, some of the ones that were most difficult, not only for the commission, but also for the public, the families, and undoubtedly the first responders that were involved, was the lack of a scene commander on scene at Portapique. The IR team went in. They went in. They were courageous. They followed their training, but there was an absence of a scene commander, and that led to a number of other knock-on effects that caused things to be overlooked and missed. One of which was doing an early canvass and a secure canvass to discover any potential victims that were remaining in the community, such as those that were so sadly discovered later on the 19th in Cobequid Court. So serious missteps there, and we address those in our recommendations. And if our recommendations are taken up, which I fully expect that they will be, we should see improvements going forward in that regard. But that would be one such example of others that I could point to.
There is a call in this report to change RCMP oversight and obviously processes and culture, and I think that's a huge undertaking. So is this a call for the force to be removed, rebuilt, replaced? Where do you see this going?
Well, that's a really good question, Sheldon, and thank you for asking it. There have been a number of reports before us calling for modernization, transformation, and reform in the culture of the RCMP. In policing in Canada right now, we are at a critical juncture. There have been so many changes over the last several decades, so many additional pressures on policing, that there really needs to be a transformation in culture, the way police operate, how they see themselves in the public safety network. And to do so, to make those transformative changes, we really need strong leadership. And we also need strong leadership, not only in those organizations, but in the bodies that hold those organizations accountable. And we need to have the ongoing pressure from our communities. It ultimately is our communities that set the expectations for police, and it is ultimately the communities that the police are accountable to.
Rethinking the structure of policing in Nova Scotia, one of the other recommendations, and police practices nationwide. Should the RCMP be doing both local policing and national policing, or should there be more focus on one area or the other?
Well, I think, again, another very good question, and it's one that has been teased out in other reports and other recommendations and reviews, and has been a topic of conversation right across the country for, the last several years. We've seen it in other provinces as well. The reality is that police officers today in Canada, and the RCMP is no different, is that they're being asked to be all things to all people all the time, 24/7. They are the default agency to call in the middle of the night when things go wrong. And it is really it's an unreasonable expectation, and it really requires a rethinking of policing and police culture and the services. The RCMP have a phenomenal structure. I mean, it's a massive organization, and they are responsible for everything from rural policing to federal and global police matters. And it is ultimately up to government and the Canadian citizens on what they expect from their federal police force. So I expect that it will be examined in the province, and we've called for continuing review of the structure of policing services for the province of Nova Scotia.
Finally, this is a call to action. This report, like many before it, have made recommendations, none of which are actually binding on a government or agency. Where would you start, Commissioner? Where would you begin if you were tasked with sorting out and implementing your report?
We would look at the main objectives of the report, and one of the things that I've already started to notice in some of the response is, there's a willingness for police agencies to work cooperatively and collaboratively going forward. That's great. But our report really calls for a whole of society response to violence prevention and improved critical incident response to violence when it does occur. And the premise of our report is that this does not rest only with the police. So I would be asking police leaders in particular to start casting their net wider, broadening their vision, and recognizing that fundamental to our report is a call for them to work as a part of a public safety network or a broader public safety ecosystem where they are still a vital role, but one role. And I think that's where they need to start. And I'm looking forward to seeing that change, because that is fundamental to the culture shift that we're talking about.
Commissioner Fitch, thank you very much for your time. I certainly appreciate it. It was a big day today for a lot of people who've been following the Mass Casualty Commission, and I wanted to take a few seconds to thank Erin Breen for joining this conversation. Erin Breen is with a group that has been very much a part of the process. In fact, they sent out a release today to help shine a light on some of what they feel are the important things that need to be done following this. Mass Casualty Commission's final report highlights critical need for society-wide response to gender-based violence. And Erin Breen, thank you again very much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Sheldon.
Tell me a little bit about your reaction to this report today and the recommendations.
Well, it's been difficult to kind of scan through. It's massive, as you know. So I've scanned through the executive summary, and I focused on the volume that is of most significance to our clients, which is volume 3, with respect to violence, that's where we really focused. And our initial reaction is that we are very pleased. We feel very heard. We feel that our submissions were largely adopted, and the contribution in particular of the Avalon Sexual Assault Center with the facilitation of amplifying the voices of those directly impacted by the perpetrator from the African Nova Scotian community who otherwise likely would not have been heard by the Commission. I see that certainly as probably our most significant contribution, and a lot of that material was adopted into the report, and we're very happy with that.
And as mentioned, this guideline going forward, or this recommendation to address this nationwide, that sounds like a huge undertaking. If you were involved, how would you even start?
Oh, I mean, it's massive, and it is. I mean, these recommendations are directed at the entire country. The implementation volume, I mean, it always deals with the dilemma of, okay, great, we've got these recommendations, now how do we ensure they just don't sit on a shelf and collect dust? So I saw that there are some recommendations regarding appointing members to councils, timelines on reporting, timelines on bringing all the stakeholders together to report back regarding implementation. It's a massive undertaking. Even just one section or one chapter is a massive undertaking. I mean, the mandate for this inquiry was absolutely huge. I think the commissioners have done an admirable job in addressing the mandate, but I guess the proof will be in the pudding now to see how the country responds and how government responds, how the RCMP responds. So it's going to be very interesting.
The Prime Minister of Canada was there. There was the Premier of Nova Scotia. There were a number of ministers and other dignitaries. But I'm wondering, as someone who's in the room, what your takeaway was, how you felt during the presentation of this report.
Well, it's funny. We weren't aware the Prime Minister was there because there was a section at the front for participants. So we got there early and sat and you know, experiencing that feeling and just even trying to imagine what they've been through. It was really heavy. And then when we stood up, the commissioners entered, the commissioners then welcomed the Prime Minister, and it was unbeknownst to us that he was even there. So he was seated behind and then left fairly quickly after. But I think for me, it's the first time I was in the room with so many of the family members. I've been in the room over the past year where some family members have been present, but there were many of them there today.
And since I wasn't there, I wasn't able to hear some of the conversations they had with reporters afterwards. There has been criticism throughout the process that it was not responsive enough to the families or perhaps the questions that they had. What was your perception of how they received this?
I don't think I'm in a good position to respond to that, Sheldon. They sat throughout the proceeding today, and they were all very quiet and were listening intently. If I was a family member, I don't know how I would respond. For them to have stayed engaged throughout this entire process is, to me, incredible. I can't imagine how difficult it was. And, for them to be there en masse today, I thought was really important.
Commissioner McDonald said this is a call to action, that the loss of these loved ones cannot be in vain. which does speak to at least the way he felt about this report, this document or series of documents that he released. From your perspective, did it hit the notes that you felt it needed to?
I feel that the commissioners have done a good job in attempting to, I guess, describe to the family members, the empathy and the significance of their, presence and their contribution, and the empathy that the commissioners have for their situation, even though it's been obvious throughout that the family members have been very upset and angry with, at times, the commission's process. I thought that the address today was very appropriate. I thought the words were sincere and meaningful. But again, I'm not a family member. I'm not one of those ones directly impacted. So I come at it from more of a removed point of view.
I've heard some folks very much describe this as a scathing report, indictment of the RCMP's actions before and during and afterwards. And there was also comment in the report about re-victimizing Lisa Banfield, and that's something that as a group your association LEAF has talked about. What does that say to you about obviously some of the public conversation, but more specifically the way that the commission felt that was handled by the RCMP?
Yeah, I think it was clearly the RCMP have a lot to answer for in this whole ordeal, including how Lisa Banfield was treated throughout. I think the commission has been very strong on that. I scanned that section kind of briefly, but and this is when they're talking about societal change. They're talking about everyone in our society has to be educated, has to be informed, and has to reevaluate how perhaps our biases and our ignorance at times may lead us to these very unfair she went through a terrible ordeal after this occurred, and she was the first victim. And she is the subject of an awful amount of scorn and hatred. And I can't imagine being in her shoes and living in the community must be very, very hard for her. So I think the commission was quite aware of that throughout the process. People felt angry that she was, the way she was treated as a witness at the inquiry, but I think the commission was very much aware of the situation that she was in, and the fact that she had been such a target for the public.
Green, as a lawyer, 130 recommendations, strongly urging government to make or take action, but I don't think there's anything binding in that document. I'm curious about your thoughts there.
This is the problem with public inquiries, and this was a very extensive and a very expensive inquiry. And it's rare to have a joint federal-provincial inquiry where you can actually take the RCMP to task. We've had provincial inquiries in Newfoundland where the actions of the RCMP have been kind of, central, but you can't go there because it's not a federal inquiry. Well, this was a federal inquiry, and they were put under the microscope. One is just can be hopeful that, all of those people who were killed, as the commissioner said today, we cannot just allow that to happen in vain. This has to result in change. Change only comes from implementation of these recommendations. I know that the participants are all at this time very committed to acting on that, but I think you have to strike now. I think you have to continue on the momentum. The more time that goes by, things lag. Groups don't meet, and slowly it gets shelved and collects dust. So I think people have to act now while the momentum is still here, while the emotion is so strong.
Erin Breen, Counsel for Avalon LEAF, that's the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund or Foundation, and Wellness Within. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.